Hey guys, tonight we're going on a journey. Not just through time, but through the heavy, creaking door of a medieval tavern. Imagine the chill of the evening air on your cheeks as you trudge down a muddy, unpaved lane. The streetlights of our modern world are gone, replaced by the faint, flickering glow spilling from a few small, grimy windows. You can hear the distant murmur of voices and a rough tune being played on a lute. The ground is uneven, your leather shoes are slick with mud and something you'd rather not think about. And the smells, the smells are a whole different beast. It's a mix of wood smoke, stale beer, roasting meat, and a pervasive scent that your modern nose can only describe as less than fresh. You finally reach a low-slung, timber-framed building. The sign above the door, if there even is one, is likely just a simple bush or a branch, signifying that ale is served within. You push open the heavy door, a bell jangling somewhere inside, and a wave of heat and noise hits you. The air is thick with smoke from the central hearth, and the light is a warm, orange flicker that casts long, dancing shadows on the walls. You probably won't survive the night, or at least you'll get sick. But for now, you are safe from the cold outside. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is. And we can all feel a little less alone in this dark and distant past. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step inside, and the first thing you notice is the sound. It's not a polite hum. It's a cacophony of loud laughter, shouted conversations, the clinking of tankards, and that lute music, which is now revealed to be a simple, repetitive folk tune. The floor is packed earth, uneven and littered with rushes and food scraps, and spilled drinks. And, well, you get the picture. The rushes are a decent idea in theory, meant to soak up spills and provide a bit of warmth. But in practice, they're rarely change, becoming a breeding ground for all sorts of unseen nasties. It's the kind of floor your dog would find endlessly fascinating, and you'd find endlessly disgusting. The room is hazy with wood smoke, stinging your eyes just a little. There's no fire code here, no ventilation system, just a hole in the ceiling called a smoke hole, which does an adequate job. Depending on the wind, your eyes adjust to the dim light, and you start to make out the faces around you. There are men with calloused hands and tired eyes, likely peasants or laborers, and merchants in slightly better clothes, huddled over a small table. You spot a traveling priest in one corner and a soldier with a dented helmet nursing a tankard in another. This isn't just a bar, it's the social heart of the community. This is where news travels, deals are made, and gossip spreads like wildfire. In a time before newspapers and social media, the tavern was the main source of information, both reliable and wildly exaggerated. One of the more popular stories told in such places was the epic tale of Beowulf, a cornerstone of English literature and a story that would be passed down orally from one generation to the next, often with new embellishments. Historians still argue whether these oral performances were a primary form of entertainment or if they had a more ritualistic or historical purpose. But one thing is clear, they were wildly popular. A quick glance around reveals the lack of a modern-day bar. Instead, there's a simple counter, and behind it, a woman with a no-nonsense expression is serving drinks from large wooden barrels. She might be the tavern owner's wife, daughter, or even the owner herself, a common practice, as brewing and innkeeping were often seen as respectable trades for women. She sizes you up in a way that suggests she's seen all types. And you're nothing special. A man stumbles past you, nearly spilling his drink, and a boisterous laugh erupts from his table. A cat, thin but clearly well fed on scraps, weaves its way between legs, and a small dog gnaws on a bone by the hearth. The smells, which were initially overwhelming, start to blend into the background, the sour tang of ale, the sweet scent of honey and roasted meat, and that ever-present earthy smell from the floor. You find an empty spot at a long communal table. You're back to the wall, and sit down. The wood is rough and splintered. You're here now, and there's no turning back. Your first task is to get a drink. The tavern owner's wife, a stern-faced woman with flour on her apron, approaches you. You gesture vaguely towards the barrels, and she grunts, grabbing a heavy earthenware jug. Your first taste of medieval life is not a grand feast, but a simple, frothy drink poured into a rough wooden cup. This isn't the crisp, golden lager you know from home. This is ale, and it's cloudy, thick, and surprisingly low in alcohol content. The primary reason for its ubiquity was simple: it was safer to drink than water. In an era before sanitation, a local river or well was often contaminated with all sorts of things you definitely didn't want in your body. Brewing ale involved boiling the water, a process that killed most of the harmful bacteria, making it a much healthier choice. This is why everyone, from children to the elderly, drank it throughout the day. It was less of a party drink and more of a daily necessity. Like a fizzy, slightly intoxicating vitamin water. Of course, not all drinks were created equal. If you were wealthy, you might have access to wine, which was imported from France or the Mediterranean. This was the drink of the elite, and it would have been expensive, often watered down, and sometimes flavored with spices to hide its less than stellar quality. For the common folk, there was also mead, a sweet fermented drink made from honey and water. It was a bit of a luxury, often reserved for special occasions or feasts, but you might find it here and there. Then there were the strange, dangerous concoctions. Historians still argue whether some of the truly bizarre recipes were actually consumed, or if they were more for medicinal purposes. For instance, there are recipes for a drink called pearl, made by infusing ale with wormwood, which sounds like something a medieval hipster would invent. The main risk, however, wasn't from the strange ingredients, but from what wasn't in the drink. While the brewing process killed bacteria, a poorly made batch could still cause a nasty stomach ache, and dishonest innkeepers were notorious for cutting their ale with all sorts of things to make it last longer. Chalk, egg whites, even ground up oyster shells, anything to add body and froth. You just have to hope your tavern keeper is more honest than most. As you sip your ale, you notice a small, shriveled-looking apple floating in someone's tankard. It's a slightly quirky tradition, a way to add a hint of sweetness or perhaps just to keep the drink from going flat too quickly. You also notice the flies. They're everywhere, a constant, buzzing soundtrack to your evening. There are no screens on the windows, and no concept of pest control, so you'll just have to get used to sharing your space and your cup with the local insect population. Speaking of things that get in your cup, imagine trying to have a serious conversation with someone and having to constantly swat at a fly circling your head. It's like a tiny, annoying, aerial assault, a minor but constant frustration in your medieval existence. But despite all this, there's a certain charm, the warmth from the fire, the easy camaraderie of the patrons, and the feeling of being part of something larger. This isn't just a place to drink, it's a place to be seen, to trade stories, and to find a bit of comfort at the end of a long, hard day. The simple act of sharing a drink with strangers, even with the flies and the questionable ingredients, connects you to the people around you in a way that feels more authentic than a modern, sterile bar. You take another sip, and the taste grows on you a little. A slightly bitter, earthy flavor. The ale warms you from the inside out, and you lean back, finally starting to relax. You've survived your first encounter with medieval drinks, which is more than some people can say. The night is still young, and your journey has just begun. With your ale in hand, your stomach starts to grumble. The smells from the hearth are getting to you now, the rich scent of roasting meat, the earthy aroma of root vegetables stewing in a pot. Dining in a medieval tavern is an experience in itself, one that is far more communal and, frankly, less sanitary than anything you're used to. There are no individual tables set for two, no linen napkins, and certainly no fine silverware. Instead, you're at a long, shared table, and the food, when it arrives, is often a single, large platter for everyone to share. You might be eating with your hands, and your knife is likely the one you carry with you. Forks, as a dining utensil, are still a bit of a fancy novelty from places like Italy, and they certainly haven't made their way to this humble establishment yet. So, you'll be tearing off hunks of bread and using them to scoop up stew or pick up pieces of meat directly from the platter. The food itself is simple but hearty. You can expect things like potage, a thick stew made of whatever vegetables were available, cabbage, onions, beans, and herbs, and perhaps a bit of meat or bone for flavor. It's the kind of dish that warms you from the inside out and is a staple for the lower classes. On the other hand, a wealthy traveler might be served a more elaborate roast, Perhaps a whole chicken or a joint of beef, likely seasoned heavily with imported spices like pepper or cinnamon, which were incredibly expensive and a sign of status. The quality of the meat could be a toss-up. 2. Historians still argue whether the common perception of medieval meat being perpetually spoiled and heavily spiced to cover it up is entirely accurate, or if it was simply a necessity due to a lack of refrigeration. You just have to hope the tavern's cook is a bit more fastidious than the average. As you lean in to grab a piece of bread, you notice the lack of serving dishes. Everything is placed on a large slice of stale bread, known as a trencher. This bread serves as your plate, and after you've finished your meal, the trencher, now soaked with grease and sauce, is either given to the dogs, a local beggar, or sometimes, if you're feeling especially virtuous, simply eaten. It's a very practical, if not slightly unappetizing, form of a disposable plate. You also can't help but notice the constant buzzing of flies that were so fond of your ale are now all over the food. You just have to shoo them away. A little dance you'll repeat every few seconds. The conversation at the table is lively, if a bit rough. A farmer complains about the poor harvest. A traveling peddler boasts about his wares. And a soldier tells a story of a recent skirmish. This is the main source of news and entertainment. There's a certain intimacy to it, a sense of shared experience that modern dining can't replicate. You're all in this together, sharing food and stories, regardless of your social station. This brings up one of the more peculiar quirks of the time, the concept of a common cup. It was a widely accepted practice for a single large cup or jug of ale to be passed around the table, with everyone taking a drink. It's a prime example of the communal spirit of the tavern, but also, let's be honest, a breeding ground for every cough, sneeze, and ailment known to man. It's the medieval equivalent of sharing a straw, but with much higher stakes. You manage to snag a piece of roasted chicken, pulling it apart with your fingers. The meat is tough but flavorful, and the scent of wood smoke clings to it. As you chew, you notice the tavern owner's daughter, no older than 10, dutifully sweeping the floor with a straw broom. The business of a tavern is a family affair, a demanding and continuous effort. You finish your meal, wipe your greasy hands on your breeches, because what else are you going to do, and lean back, feeling satisfied. Your belly is full, the ale is making you sleepy, and the stories around you are captivating. You've navigated the first major hurdle of your medieval evening, and you're ready for whatever comes next. Now that you've had your fill of ale and trencher bread, you can take a moment to observe the subtle but very real social dynamics at play in the tavern. This isn't a free-for-all. There are unspoken rules and hierarchies that govern who sits where, who speaks to whom, and how you're treated. At the long tables in the center of the room, you'll find the common laborers and peasants. They're boisterous, sharing stories of the day's work, their faces ruddy from the sun and wind. They're here for a simple respite from a difficult life, a moment of warmth and company before heading back to their humble homes. Their laughter is loud and unfiltered, their arguments short and to the point. Over in the corners or at smaller, separate tables, you'll find those of a slightly higher social standing. A traveling merchant, for example, might be carefully counting his coins and making a note in a small ledger. Wary of the eyes around him, he's here for business as much as pleasure, perhaps striking a deal with a local farmer to buy his wool or grain. His clothes are made of finer cloth, and his manner is more reserved. He keeps his ale close and his purse closer. In another corner, a scribe or a priest might be having a quiet conversation, their talk more scholarly and their gestures more refined. These are the people with a little more to lose, and they conduct themselves with a certain decorum, even in the rough and tumble environment of the tavern. The most important people in the room, of course, are the landowners or local gentry. If they even deign to visit such an establishment, they would have the best seats, a clear path to the hearth, and a fresher-looking jug of ale. Their presence would change the dynamic of the whole room, with conversations growing a little quieter and a little more respectful. It's a clear visual representation of the feudal system at work. The closer you are to the fire and the more space you have, the higher your status. It's like the medieval version of a VIP section, but with fewer velvet ropes and more hay on the floor. There's a quirky tidbit about this that illustrates the divide. While a peasant might use his own simple, unmarked wooden tankard, a traveling merchant or a guild member might have a personalized pewter or even silver cup, a small but important marker of their status. This cup would be a prized possession, often passed down through families. It's like a medieval personalized coffee mug, only way more valuable and with a much higher risk of getting stolen. The communal cups you remember from earlier were for the lowest rungs of society, a symbol of their shared poverty. And a wealthy man would never dream of drinking from one. Historians still argue whether the tavern was a place for social mobility or simply a reinforcement of the rigid class structure. On one hand, you have people from all walks of life sharing the same space, exchanging ideas and information. A peasant might overhear a bit of news from a merchant that could help him with his harvest. On the other hand, the seating arrangements and the quality of service you receive are a constant reminder of your place in society. The innkeeper would be more attentive to a well-dressed visitor, knowing that they might have more coin to spend. It's a delicate dance, a blend of a social melting pot and a strict social order, all taking place in a smoky room lit by a flickering fire. You, a visitor from the future, don't really fit into any of these categories, which makes you a subject of curious glances. Your clothes are strange, your mannerisms are different, and your hands are suspiciously soft. You find yourself in a liminal space, neither a peasant nor a noble, and the people around you can sense it. This is both a blessing and a curse. You are an outsider, which means you're treated with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. But it also means you are not bound by the unwritten rules of this place. You can simply sit, observe, and enjoy the show. And what a show it is! The noise in the tavern swells again. But this time, it's not just raucous conversation. A new sound cuts through the din, the bright, clear notes of a lute. A man has taken a seat on a small, elevated stool near the fire, his instrument resting on his knee. This is the minstrel, and he is about to become your entertainment for the evening. In a time before podcasts, television, or even printed books for the common person, the minstrel was the primary source of stories, news, and songs. He was a traveler, a professional storyteller who made his living moving from town to town, from tavern to castle, carrying with him a vast repertoire of songs and tales. The stories he tells are a mix of the familiar and the fantastical. He might sing a ballad about a historical battle you've never heard of, a romantic tale of a knight and his lady, or a ribald and funny folk song about a cheating wife and her foolish husband. His voice is trained to be heard over the clamor of the room, and he uses dramatic gestures to bring his characters to life. As he plays, a few of the patrons begin to sing along, their voices a rough but joyful chorus. This isn't a passive experience, it's interactive. People know these songs and stories by heart, and they participate in the telling. The minstrel is not just a performer, he's a custodian of the culture, the person who keeps the collective memory of the community alive. A quirky tidbit about these minstrels is that they were often seen as a bit disreputable. While a popular minstrel could earn a decent living and was a welcome guest in a noble's hall, they were also associated with a transient lifestyle and could be seen as a source of trouble or moral corruption by the more pious members of society. They lived by their wits, their talent, and their ability to read a room. A good minstrel knew what his audience wanted to hear, and he would tailor his stories and songs to the tastes of the locals. If he was in a fishing village, he might sing about the sea. If he was at a noble's court, he might sing a more refined love song. Historians still argue whether the stories and songs of the minstrels were a reliable source of historical information or if they were largely works of fiction. We know that some of the greatest epics of the time, like the stories of King Arthur, were spread and embellished by minstrels and troubadours. But how much truth lies within those tales? It's a fascinating question. The minstrels had a vested interest in making their stories entertaining, and a good story often makes a better narrative than a completely accurate one. The lines between history and legend were blurry, and the minstrel was the one holding the pen, so to speak. As the minstrel finishes a song, a few coins are tossed onto the floor, a sign of appreciation. He nods, acknowledges the generosity, and begins another tune. This time, it's a lament, a slow and mournful melody that captures the melancholy of a cold winter night. The mood in the room shifts. The loud conversations quiet down, and people lean in, captivated by the sad beauty of the music. For a moment, all the daily struggles, the hard work, the cold, the hunger, fade into the background, and all that matters is the story being told. It's a powerful thing, this shared experience of art. It connects you not just to the people around you, but to the countless generations of people who have sat in similar taverns, listening to similar songs, feeling the same emotions. You take another sip of your ale. The simple taste of perfect complement to the simple, beautiful music. It is a moment of pure, unadulterated medieval joy, a feeling that transcends the lack of hygiene and the threat of disease. You are simply present, a witness to a beautiful, fleeting piece of history. The minstrel has just finished a rousing ballad about a local hero, and the tavern erupts in applause and cheers. Now that the main entertainment is over, the low-level hum of conversation and laughter resumes, and your attention shifts to the corners of the room. You notice a small group of men huddled around a rough-hewn table, their faces intent and their hands moving quickly. This is where the real action happens. The kind of action that can make or break a man's fortunes in a single evening: gambling. Gambling was a hugely popular pastime in medieval Europe, both for the rich and the poor. A way to pass the time and maybe, just maybe, walk away with a little more coin than you started with. The games they play are simple but exhilarating. The most popular is a form of dice game, often played with 2 small bone or wood dice. The rules were straightforward: roll the dice, and the highest number wins. There's a lot of shouting, a lot of groaning, and a lot of coin changing hands. Another popular game is tables, which is a medieval precursor to backgammon. It's a bit more strategic, played on a wooden board with small counters, and it requires a bit more skill than just throwing dice. Then there's knucklebones, a game played with the ankle bones of a sheep or goat. This one is particularly quirky, and it was a common sight to see people of all ages playing it. The bones, called astragali, were tossed into the air and caught on the back of the hand, with the number of bones caught determining the score. It's a game that required a bit of finesse and dexterity, and it was a favorite among both children and adults. The stakes here are high, even for a few coppers. For a peasant, a single copper coin could be the difference between a full belly and a hungry night. For a merchant, it could be the cost of a full meal or a night's lodging. The air around the table is thick with tension and excitement, a palpable energy that draws you in. A burly man with a thick beard slams his hand on the table, cursing his luck, while a younger man with a sly grin rakes in a small pile of coins. There's a certain etiquette to it. Even here, you don't cheat, and you don't question the outcome. Not if you value your teeth. At least, historians still argue whether the prevalence of gambling was a sign of a society's degeneracy or a simple, necessary release from the stresses of daily life. For a peasant who spends all day toiling in the fields, a few hours of gambling in a smoky tavern could be the only real escape he has. It's a way to feel a little bit of control over a life that is otherwise completely out of your hands. The random roll of a die offers the tantalizing possibility of a better life, even if only for a night. But gambling isn't without its risks. The authorities were always wary of it, and it was often restricted or outright banned. The laws were rarely enforced in places like this, but if a game got too out of hand, or if a fight broke out, the local constable might be called in. A common folk tale of the time told of a man who gambled away his soul to a demon. A cautionary tale meant to warn people of the dangers of letting greed get the better of them. It's a reminder that even in a place of supposed revelry, there are unseen dangers lurking just beneath the surface. You watch for a while, mesmerized by the quiet desperation and the sudden explosions of joy. You're glad you don't have any coin to lose, as it feels like the kind of game you can't win. You've seen enough of the medieval tavern's darker side for one night. And the hour is growing late. The fire is starting to die down, and the crowd is thinning out. The need for a place to sleep is starting to feel a little more urgent. The hour has grown late. The fire is now a bed of glowing embers, and the crowd has thinned to just a few hardy souls. The minstrel is gone. The gamblers have settled their debts, or their grudges, and a heavy silence has begun to settle over the room, broken only by a few snores. Now comes the moment you've been dreading, figuring out where you're going to sleep. In a modern inn, this would be a simple matter of getting a key to your private room. But in a medieval tavern, things are a little more communal. There is no concept of a private room for the average traveler. Your lodging for the night is likely to be a simple, shared space. Often, this was the very same room you were just drinking in, now repurposed for sleeping. The innkeeper or his family might bring out straw mattresses and lay them out on the floor, and you would choose a spot next to your fellow travelers. privacy is a luxury that simply doesn't exist. You'll be sleeping side by side with the burly peasant from the next village, the traveling merchant, and maybe even a stray dog or two that has decided to make a bed by the dying embers of the fire. It's an intimate arrangement, to say the least, and you're forced to get comfortable with the concept of sleeping in close proximity to total strangers. The sleeping arrangements were notoriously unhygienic. The straw mattresses, or palliasse, were rarely changed, and they were a favorite home for fleas, lice, and other unpleasant little critters. It was a common joke of the time that you never slept alone in a tavern. A quirky tidbit is that these straw beds were often shared by multiple people, head to toe, for warmth and to save space. It's a bit like a medieval sleepover, but with much less pleasant company. It's also worth noting that if you were a bit more well off, you might be offered a bed upstairs in a loft, but even there, you'd likely be sharing the space with other paying guests. True privacy was reserved for the wealthiest of travelers who could afford a lodging house or to stay at a monastery. The air, which was thick with smoke and the smell of ale all evening, now carries the sense of damp earth and unwashed bodies. You can hear the rhythmic breathing and the occasional snore of the people around you. You take off your shoes, but that's about it. You wouldn't want to get your nice clothes dirty. And besides, there's no place to hang them up. You just lie down on the rustling straw, pull your cloak up over you, and try to get comfortable. The ground is hard, uneven, and you can feel every lump and twig beneath you. The silence is not as complete as you'd like. There's the rustle of the straw, the occasional cough, and the constant threat of a snore quake from your new sleeping companion. Historians still argue whether the lack of privacy was a source of great social anxiety or if it was simply an accepted fact of life in an age where communities were much more close-knit. For people who lived in small cottages with their entire families, the idea of sharing a room with strangers might not have been so strange. It was a way of life, a necessity of travel. There was an unspoken social contract. You don't bother your neighbors. You keep to yourself as much as possible, and you hope that no one steals your meager possessions while you're asleep. You close your eyes, trying to block out the sounds and the smells, and you drift off to sleep. Your dreams a strange blend of past and future, of ancient taverns and clean hotel rooms. You've survived the first night, a feat in and of itself. You wake up in the pre-dawn darkness. The tavern a quiet and much colder place than it was last night. The embers in the hearth have died completely, and the chill of the morning air has seeped in through the walls. You roll over, feeling the rough texture of the straw, and try to make sense of your surroundings. Most of your fellow travelers are still sleeping, their bodies a jumble of cloaks and blankets on the floor. The tavern owner's family is already up. However, starting the daily routine of preparing for the day ahead, you can hear the clatter of a pot and the murmur of quiet conversation. As the sun begins to rise, a new character enters the scene. A man in a simple tunic with a small pouch at his belt approaches the tavern owner, and you overhear a quiet but intense conversation. This is the village moneylender, a person who occupies a crucial and often resented role in medieval society. In a world without banks, the moneylender was the go-to person for a quick loan. A farmer might need a loan to buy a new plow. A merchant might need one to fund a journey. Or a family might need one to pay for a funeral. The rates were often exorbitant, and a single bad harvest or a failed business venture could trap a person in a cycle of debt for the rest of their lives. But the tavern isn't just a place for getting a loan. It's a place where merchants gather to conduct business. The quiet conversation you just overheard might be a simple transaction, a merchant buying a shipment of grain from a local farmer, or a craftsman selling his wares to a traveling peddler. The tavern serves as a de facto business hub, a place where people can meet, exchange goods, and settle accounts. In this bustling, semi-public space, a merchant might spread out his wares on a table. Everything from spices and silks to basic tools and woolen cloth. This is a very different kind of transaction than the one you're used to. There are no credit cards, no receipts, and no digital transactions. Everything is done in person, in cash, or more likely, in barter. A farmer might trade a sack of grain for a new pair of boots. Or a weaver might trade a bolt of cloth for a joint of meat. A quirky detail about this is that tavern owners themselves often served as informal bankers and moneylenders. They would hold a traveler's valuables for a fee, and they would often extend credit to their regulars, keeping a running tally on a wooden stick called a tally stick. One half of the stick would be kept by the tavern owner, and the other by the customer. When a payment was made, a notch would be carved into both sticks. A primitive but effective form of record keeping. It's a charmingly simple system, and a good reminder of how trust and community were built in an age before paperwork. Historians still argue whether this system was more susceptible to fraud or if the communal nature of it made it more honest. You watch as the moneylender leaves, a newfound spring in his step, and the farmer who was speaking to him sinks into a chair, his head in his hands. You can see the weight of the debt on him, a heavy burden that will follow him out of the tavern and into the fields. For a moment, you feel a profound sense of gratitude for the modern financial system. As flawed as it is, it's a small but significant detail of medieval life that reveals the vulnerability and precariousness of a common person's existence. As the tavern slowly starts to fill up with the morning rush, you realize it's time to continue your journey. You step back out into the cool morning air. The familiar smells of wood smoke and damp earth now joined by the sharper, more acidic scent of human waste and refuse. The town is stirring to life, but it looks very different from the way you remember it from last night. In the darkness, the unpaved lanes were a simple path from one point to another. But in the light of day, you see them for what they are, a haphazard mess of ruts, mud, and garbage. There are no sidewalks, no gutters, and no street cleaners. Everyone just throws their waste, both human and animal, right out the front door and into the street. It's a bit of a shock to the modern senses, and you have to be careful where you step. The houses that line the street are a jumble of styles. You see small, single-room cottages with thatched roofs and dirt floors, a humble and honest abode for a peasant or a laborer. These houses are often little more than a single room, with the family sleeping together on a straw mat near the hearth. Next to them, you might see a timber-framed house with a second story that juts out over the street, the home of a wealthy merchant or a master craftsman. These are the medieval version of a McMansion, a clear sign of wealth and status. There's a quirky tidbit about these houses, because they were often built with a second story overhanging the first. It was much easier to toss out your waste from the upper floor without it hitting the wall below. A truly practical, if not entirely sanitary, architectural feature. The streets are bustling with activity. You see a farmer with a cart full of vegetables, a woman with a basket of fresh eggs on her arm, and a group of children chasing a stray pig down a muddy alley. The sounds are a symphony of daily life, the creak of a cartwheel, the clatter of a blacksmith's hammer in the distance, the lowing of a cow, and the chatter of people going about their business. Everyone here is on a mission. There is a sense of purpose and urgency that is missing from the quiet revelry of the night before. As you walk, you notice a large building in the center of town, a grand and imposing structure. This is the church, and it is the heart of the community, both spiritually and socially. The church bell rings out the hour, and its presence is a constant reminder of the pervasive influence of religion in medieval life. Historians still argue whether the church's power was a force for good or a tool of social control. But one thing is clear: it was a constant and powerful presence in the lives of everyone. From the king to the humblest peasant, the church served as a bank, a hospital, a school, and a meeting hall, and it was the source of all moral and intellectual authority. You pass by a small market square, already alive with vendors setting up their stalls. The air here is filled with the smells of fresh bread, cheese, and 100 other things. The marketplace is where you will get your next meal, and where you will see the full spectrum of medieval society. You can also spot the public well, where people are lining up with buckets to get their water for the day. This is the town's primary source of water, and it's a social hub in its own right, a place where people can catch up on the local gossip while they wait their turn. As you continue to walk, you see that the town is a living, breathing organism, a constant cycle of work, worship, and social interaction. You realize that your time in the tavern was just a small piece of a much larger, and much dirtier, puzzle. Your morning walk through the muddy streets of the medieval town has led you to the source of that rhythmic clanging you heard from a distance. The sound grows louder and more percussive with every step you take, and soon you find yourself standing in front of a small, open-fronted workshop. The air here is different, too. It's thick with the smell of coal smoke and hot metal. A fire burns fiercely in a central forge, and a thick-set man with a leather apron and soot-stained hands is working at an anvil, his muscles rippling with each swing of a heavy hammer. This is the blacksmith, and he is one of the most essential people in the community. The blacksmith's workshop, or smithy, is a beehive of activity. He is a one-man factory, producing and repairing everything the town needs to function. He makes the horseshoes for the local farmers, the nails for the carpenter, the hinges for the doors of the tavern, and the heads for the farmers' plows. He also makes swords and armor for soldiers and knights, though a good armor set might take weeks or even months of painstaking work. He's not just a laborer, he's a master craftsman, a person with a deep and intimate knowledge of his materials. He can tell you the difference between good iron and bad, and he knows just the right temperature to make it malleable. He can also get a bit philosophical. A quirky tidbit is that blacksmiths were often thought to possess a kind of magic, a mystical ability to transform a cold, unyielding lump of metal into a beautiful and useful tool. They were seen as a kind of creator, a person who could conjure a tool from fire and earth. His work is a constant dance of heat, sound, and force. He pulls a glowing hot piece of iron from the forge, the metal a fiery orange, and places it on the anvil. The hammer comes down with a resounding clang, and the metal shrieks in protest, sparks flying in every direction. The sound is deafening, but it's also beautiful, a testament to the power of human ingenuity. He works with a quiet, focused intensity, his brow furrowed in concentration. The tools he uses are simple: hammers, tongs, and a bellows, but in his hands, they become instruments of creation. The blacksmith's role in the community was so important that he was often given a place of honor. He wasn't a peasant, but a skilled laborer who could make a good living from his craft. Historians still argue whether the blacksmith's social status was a product of the necessity of his craft or if it was more about the mystical reverence given to his control over fire and metal. The blacksmith's workshop was also a social hub, a place where people would gather to talk and watch him work. It was a place for gossip, a place to catch up on the latest news, and a place to simply escape the boredom of daily life. As you stand and watch, you feel a deep sense of connection to this place. This is not just a job, it's a craft, a calling, and a source of deep pride. You see the blacksmith's apprentice, a young boy with a dirty face and a look of rapt attention, watching his master's every move. This knowledge, this craft, is being passed down from one generation to the next, a living chain of history. The things he makes will last for generations, a tangible legacy of his skill and his labor. You notice a freshly forged horseshoe, still hot and shimmering with a bluish tint on a nearby workbench. It is a perfect, simple thing, a testament to the power of human hands and a roaring fire. You've seen the social side of medieval life. Now you've seen the very core of its industry, a quiet, powerful force that keeps the entire world running. As you continue your journey from the blacksmith's forge, you become more acutely aware of the smells around you. The stench of the streets is something your modern brain has a hard time processing. A pungent mix of human and animal waste, rotting food, and stagnant water. It's a constant, background odor that permeates everything. This brings you to a very important, if unpleasant, topic of medieval life: hygiene. The concept of public health as we know it simply didn't exist. There was no widespread understanding of germs or bacteria, and waste disposal was, well, let's just say it was very much a throw it out the window affair. The streets were essentially open sewers, and the only cleaners were the pigs, dogs, and other scavengers that roamed freely. It was, in a word, a biological nightmare. Yet, it's not as if people never bathed. A quirky fact is that many medieval towns, particularly in the later period, had public bathhouses. These were social hubs, a place where people could go to get clean, but also to socialize and relax. They were often a bit like a modern sauna, with steam and hot water, and a few were even co-ed. A visit to the public bath was a special occasion, not a daily routine. People would bring their own soap, which was made from animal fat and lye, and they would spend hours there, getting clean and catching up on the local gossip. It was a luxury, a treat, and a brief respite from the ever-present dirt and grime of daily life. On a more personal level, cleanliness was a matter of social class. The wealthy could afford more frequent baths and would use more expensive soaps and perfumes. The average peasant, on the other hand, would likely only bathe a few times a year, often in a large wooden tub in front of the hearth. For a lot of people, the closest they came to a full body bath was a simple face and hand wash with cold water from a basin. You remember the communal drinking cup from the tavern? It seems a lot less appealing now that you've seen the way people live. The lack of personal hygiene had serious consequences. Disease was rampant, and a simple cut or a common cold could be a death sentence. The bubonic plague was the ultimate example of this, a horrifying epidemic that swept through Europe, killing millions. But even on a day-to-day basis, people lived with a constant threat of illness. Historians still argue whether the high mortality rates were more a product of poor sanitation or a lack of medical knowledge. The two, of course, were inextricably linked. A society that doesn't understand germs can't possibly understand how to prevent the spread of disease. And the consequences were dire. You can't help but feel a little grossed out by all of this. And you find yourself subconsciously holding your breath as you walk past a particularly odorous section of the street. It's a constant reminder of how far we've come in such a short amount of time. The simple act of turning on a tap and getting clean water. Or walking down a paved street without fear of stepping in something foul. Is a luxury that people 1,000 years ago couldn't even dream of. You continue on your way, your shoes caked with a fresh layer of mud, and you make a mental note to appreciate your next shower. Having navigated the surprisingly fragrant streets of the medieval town, you start to pay closer attention to the people themselves, specifically to their clothing. You've noticed a lot of browns, grays, and natural tones, but there's a wider variety than you might have first imagined. Fashion in the Middle Ages was less about style and more about function. A clear marker of social status, and a way to protect yourself from the elements. For the average person, clothes were a precious commodity, often made at home and mended over and over again until they were little more than rags. A peasant's outfit would be simple and practical. Men would wear a tunic, a long shirt made of coarse wool or linen, cinched at the waist with a simple rope or leather belt. They would wear leggings, or brays, tucked into simple leather shoes. The colors were often undyed, a natural gray, brown, or off-white, as dyes were expensive and a luxury for the wealthy. Women would wear a long tunic, often with a simple apron over it, and a headdress to cover their hair. The materials were coarse and scratchy, but durable enough to withstand the rigors of a day of hard labor. For the wealthy, fashion was a different story entirely. A wealthy merchant might be dressed in a long tunic made of fine wool or even silk, dyed a vibrant color like blue or red, which was a symbol of their immense wealth. They would wear fine leather boots, a hat, and a fur-lined cloak. The more you could afford to have your clothes cut, shaped, and embellished, the higher your status. A common style was the cote hardie, a close-fitting garment that was often laced up the front, a precursor to the modern button-up shirt. The level of tailoring was a point of pride, and a skilled tailor was a valuable member of the community. A quirky fact about medieval clothing is that bright and vibrant colors were often seen as a sign of moral depravity. Especially for women, the more pious members of society often preferred a more subdued and natural color palette, which was seen as a sign of humility and piety. This is an interesting counterpoint to the idea that bright colors were simply a sign of wealth. It shows that even in an age of limited choices, there were still moral and social codes that dictated what you could and couldn't wear. Historians still argue whether the sumptuary laws of the time, laws that dictated what a person could and couldn't wear based on their social class, were a real effort to enforce social order or if they were simply a way for the wealthy to protect their status and prevent the lower classes from dressing above their station. Regardless of the reason, the laws were a clear sign of the rigidity of the social structure. A peasant could not wear a silk tunic, and a merchant could not wear a fur cloak, even if he could afford it. You were born into your station, and your clothes were a constant, visible reminder of your place in the world. As you walk through the town, you see all of these styles on display. You see the farmer with his simple, worn tunic, the merchant in his finely tailored blue coat, and the priest in his plain black robes. It's a living tableau of the social and economic order of the time. A subtle but constant reminder of your place in the world. You're glad you can walk through this world as a spectator and not a participant. Free from the social pressures of a time when the color of your tunic could determine how you were treated. You continue on your way, a little more aware of the intricate web of social norms that govern this seemingly simple world. After a morning spent observing the industry and the social codes of the medieval town, you find yourself drawn toward the town's most vibrant and chaotic hub, the marketplace. The air, which was thick with coal smoke and unhygienic smells near the blacksmiths and the street, is now a heady mix of 100 different scents. You can smell fresh bread from a baker's stall, the pungent aroma of cheeses, the sweet scent of honey and roasting meat, and the earthy smell of vegetables piled high on wooden carts. This is the economic heart of the community, a place where the countryside and the town meet, and where the daily necessities of life are bought, sold, and bartered. The marketplace is a cacophony of sound, the voices of vendors shouting out their wares, the lowing of livestock in pens, the chatter of people haggling over prices, and the laughter of children playing a game of tag between the stalls. It's a living, breathing thing, a constant motion of people and goods. You see a farmer with a basket of fresh eggs, a weaver with a bolt of homespun wool, and a traveling peddler with a wagon full of pots, pans, and other household goods. The variety of goods is staggering, a testament to the fact that even in a seemingly simple society, there was a complex network of trade and commerce. Bartering is the primary form of exchange here. While there is currency, copper, silver, and gold coins are in use, most transactions are a negotiation, a dance of give and take. You see a woman trying to trade a sack of grain for a new pair of shoes. Her voice a rapid-fire string of arguments and counter-arguments. It's a bit like a medieval chess game, a constant calculation of value and need. A quirky tidbit about this is that a person's reputation was their most valuable asset. If a vendor was known to be honest and his goods were of good quality, he could command a higher price. If he was known to be a cheat, he might find himself with no customers at all. It was a self-policing system, a kind of social contract based on trust. The marketplace is also a social hub, a place to catch up on the latest gossip and news. A traveling merchant might tell you a story about a distant city, and a local farmer might tell you about a new planting technique. It's an open forum for the exchange of ideas and information, and a vital source of entertainment. A minstrel might have a more curated repertoire, but the marketplace is a spontaneous and unfiltered look into the lives of the people around you. It's also a place for public announcements, with a town crier occasionally ringing a bell and shouting out news of a new law or royal proclamation. Historians still argue whether the medieval marketplace was a true reflection of a town's prosperity or if it was simply a place for the wealthy to show off their luxuries. It's true that you would see expensive spices and silks here, but you would also see the humble peasant with a single chicken to sell. It was a place where all of society met on common ground. A place where need and luxury existed side by side. As you walk through the bustling stalls, you feel a sense of connection to the people around you, a shared sense of humanity that transcends the centuries. You have seen the social side of the tavern, the industrial side of the forge, and now, the beating, commercial heart of the medieval town. You are ready to move on. Having witnessed the bustling life of the marketplace, you turn your attention to a small, quiet corner where a man is setting up a makeshift stall. He has a small table covered in jars and pots, and he's speaking to a woman who is holding a wriggling baby wrapped in a swaddle. This is the local apothecary, and his wares are a mix of traditional folk remedies and some truly bizarre concoctions. This is your first look into the world of medieval medicine, and it's a far cry from the modern hospital you're used to. The dominant medical theory of the time was the concept of the four humors, a belief system inherited from the ancient Greeks. It was believed that the human body was made up of four basic fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. A healthy person was one whose humors were in balance. A sick person was someone whose humors were out of balance. And the job of a doctor or an apothecary was to restore that balance. This could be done through diet, herbs, or, in more extreme cases, bloodletting, the practice of opening a vein to drain off excess blood. It's a terrifying idea to our modern sensibilities, but it was a common and accepted practice. It's the kind of thing that makes you want to go back in time and hand everyone a bottle of hand sanitizer and a box of antibiotics. The remedies you see on the apothecary's table are a mix of the effective and the downright dangerous. You see jars of dried herbs like chamomile and mint, which were known to be effective for calming a stomach or aiding sleep. You also see strange things like crocodile dung and crushed gems, which were believed to have medicinal properties. A quirky fact is that one of the most popular remedies for a toothache was to rub a tooth taken from a human corpse on your cheek. It was believed that the dead tooth would somehow transfer its properties to your own. A macabre and completely ineffective cure. The apothecary himself is a walking contradiction. He might have a genuine knowledge of the healing properties of plants and herbs, a wisdom passed down through generations. He might also be a charlatan, selling snake oil and false promises to a desperate and uneducated populace. You're left to wonder which one this man is. Historians still argue whether medieval medicine was an act of pure superstition or if it was a genuine, albeit primitive, attempt at scientific inquiry. There's no doubt that some of the herbal remedies were effective. The willow bark, for example, was known to have pain-relieving properties long before we discovered aspirin, which is derived from it. But the reliance on the theory of humors, and the acceptance of bizarre and unsanitary practices, made for a medical system that was often more dangerous than the illness itself. The concept of miasma, the belief that disease was spread by bad smells, was a common one. And while it was wrong, it did at least lead to some, albeit limited, efforts at sanitation, like the burning of aromatic herbs. You feel a profound sense of gratitude for the progress of science as you walk away from the stall. You have seen the social, the commercial, and now the medical side of this world, and you are ready to put this journey behind you. You have walked through a world that is both familiar and alien, and you are ready to head home. Your journey through the medieval world has been a long one, filled with new sights, sounds, and smells. You've walked the muddy streets, shared a tankard of ale with a peasant, watched a minstrel perform, and witnessed the raw power of the blacksmith's forge. You've seen the social hierarchies at play in the tavern, the chaotic energy of the marketplace, and the grim realities of medieval medicine. It's been an immersive, if not entirely comfortable, experience. Now, as the sun begins to set on this long day, it's time to begin your final leg of the journey. To start the long, slow, quiet walk home, you leave the town behind you, the sounds of its bustling life fading into the distance. The road is still unpaved, but it feels different now. It's no longer a strange and alien thing, but a path you've come to know, with its familiar ruts and bumps. The air is growing cooler again, and the sky is turning a deep shade of purple and orange. The stars are starting to come out, a brilliant, clear tapestry that you can only see in a world without light pollution. There are no streetlights here, no neon signs, just the soft, cool glow of the moon and the endless, sparkling canvas of the night sky. The crickets begin their nightly song, a rhythmic, gentle sound that soothes your tired mind. The journey home is not a sprint, but a slow, contemplative walk. You think about the things you've seen and the people you've met. The tavern owner, stern but kind, the minstrel, with his magical stories, the blacksmith, with his quiet power. They were all just people, living their lives in a world that was so much harder than your own, but filled with a simple beauty you hadn't expected. You remember the shared meal on the trencher, the warmth of the fire, the easy laughter of strangers. You remember the sense of community, a shared struggle that made people rely on each other in a way that feels distant and strange to us now. It's a bittersweet feeling, this sense of connection to a world that you could never truly be a part of. The wind whispers through the trees, a soft and gentle sound. You are tired now, your feet are sore, and your mind is starting to feel heavy. The images of the day start to blend together, a hazy collage of firelight, muddy streets, and smiling faces. The world around you is fading, becoming less defined. The trees on the side of the road are just dark shapes against the sky. The sounds are a low hum, a gentle buzz in your ears. It's time to let go of the journey now, to release the past and come back to the present. You are safe, you are warm, you are in your own bed, and the noise of the medieval world is fading away. The smell of wood smoke and old ale is gone, replaced by the soft, clean scent of your sheets. The sound of a lute is gone, replaced by the gentle hum of your fan. You can feel the warmth of your blanket, the softness of your pillow. The journey is over. It's time to rest now. Let your breathing slow down. Let your muscles relax. Let your mind clear. Just float on this feeling of peace. It's time for you to sleep.